Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to my Errol Flynn Slept Here book series. Now I have episode 1. I will link it somewhere here or in the description. That one is very, very juicy because I lay the groundwork for the book and I give you some perspective, some background on this swashbuckling superstar of the golden age of Hollywood, Errol Flynn. This man was unbelievably crazy. He was a daredevil. He was devastatingly handsome. He was the original Hollywood action movie star, and he lived life to the fullest, right up to the hilt, and burned out and had a heart attack and died at the age of 50. The coroner at his autopsy said that this man had the body of an 85-year-old. He did such hard living, hard drinking, hard partying, hard smoking, traveled everywhere. He did everything from being a war correspondent to stand on trial for statutory rape and murder throughout his lifetime, which he was acquitted. He had jam-packed about 60 years worth of living before he even reached the age of 25 when he first entered Hollywood. So if you have not checked that video out, I would really encourage you to do it. And I also start the series off with a little ghost story. Errol Flynn built a castle in the San Fernando Mountains high above Hollywood called Mulholland Farm. Now I'm sure y'all have heard of the Playboy Mansion, right? We all know Hugh Hefner holding all kinds of crazy parties. Well, before the Playboy Mansion, there was Errol Flynn, and this man threw all types of parties and had all types of debauchery going on up there at Mulholland Farm. He was notorious for it. He was a notorious womanizer. There's so many crazy stories about this man. Today we're going to start with the preface and the introduction. And to be honest with you, I usually skip prefaces and introductions when I'm reading books, but not this one. This book from start to finish is just jam-packed with so many cool stories, mystery, intrigue, craziness. I can't wait to get into it with you. I will link that episode 1 video down below, but let's get started. One thing I want to address, I had quite a few of you leave me comments saying that I was mispronouncing Errol's name, that I was saying Earl instead of Errol, and I'm aware. I do know that it's Errol, and I also know when I went back and watched it that I was saying Earl the entire time, and I know it can kind of piss people off sometimes and annoy them when you mispronounce someone's name, especially if they're really famous. All I can tell you is that it was a long film day, and by take 21, sometimes you just want to get the words out and you forget. And I know it's Errol. I will do my darndest to pronounce it correctly. I can't guarantee that I won't say Earl now and then, especially if I'm talking fast or it's a long day. But I do apologize. Thank you for reminding me. Please do not come for me in the comments with the flaming torches and the pitchforks. I'm sorry if I disrupted anyone's day by mispronouncing Errol Flynn's name. I have to tell you, some of the comments were a little bit snarky, and when they're snarky for really no reason, they just get deleted. I mean, that's just the way it is. But yes, I am aware. I will do my darndest to pronounce his name correctly. So let's get started with the introduction. That was my little public service announcement. So here we go with the preface and the introduction to the book Errol Flynn Slept Here. And I have this book on Kindle. I wanted to have an actual book to hold to read to you guys, but the book was $85 on Amazon. I believe it's out of print, so that's why I am reading from the Kindle version. So here we go. What a strange topic for a book, Errol Flynn's house. It wasn't the grandest home in the sprawling set of duchies that bear the collective designation of Hollywood. It didn't have the biggest living space, to the surprise and sometimes disappointment of casual visitors who expected a castle. It wasn't the best designed, but rather has been described as a mishmash. It often wasn't clean and green. The winds channeling through the gorges blew dirt into the windows and the pool and the tennis court. It wasn't easily accessible. The prospective visitor, traveling in bad weather or at night, risked life and limb. What Errol Flynn's house had going for it was Errol Flynn. Writer Earl Conrad, isn't that funny? Earl. Writer Earl Conrad, who ghost wrote with Flynn the memoir My Wicked, Wicked Ways, tried to pinpoint the world's enduring fascination with Flynn. And I have that book. I've been reading it while I read this book that I'm reading to you guys right now, this is his autobiography that he wrote. It's really good. So if you guys want me to read that, let me know in the comments. So this is what the ghostwriter Earl Conrad said about Flynn. Quote, "The remarkability of him was his individuality, his uniqueness, a certain independence and even wildness, as if he were an untamed brother of the sky, like the wild geese that fly overhead, while domesticated geese in their barnyard warrens are limited to looking upward yearningly at the free flying geese overhead, going hundreds of miles a day, north or south." End quote. We earthbound humans dream our dreams of adventure, love-making, sailing, flying, wealth, beauty, and conquest. He lived all of them every day. Within the reminiscence of the people who knew him, the three words that appear most often are larger than life, alluding to a genuine swashbuckler, a quintessential human being with all the blessings and all the flaws of creation wrapped up in a 6-foot, 2-inch collection of molecules. He entertained, he created, he inspired, he experimented, he destroyed, he made love, he hated, part poet and part sadist, in one breath charming and in the next cruel, a fabulous looking guy who could appear genuinely ugly, and he did all this in 50 short years. This wasn't just any house, this was his house. The story of the house on Mulholland Drive doesn't end with Errol Flynn. The place that he had made famous and infamous and notorious and perverted would endure for more than 30 years after he left it, and it would be owned by two men who were also described as larger than life, giving this particular house quite the pedigree. Stuart Hamblin's name today lacks the weight that it carried 50 years ago when he hobnobbed with John Wayne, Roy Rogers, and Ronald Reagan, and wrote hit songs and broadcast a radio show that was #1 on the West Coast and syndicated across the country. But Hamblin lived at Mulholland Farm during 20 of his most productive and successful years, and to this day, the Hamblins view Mulholland as part of the family. Ricky Nelson's name has endured more for his presence on a hit TV series that ran 14 seasons than for his first love and greatest talent, his music. Nelson lived at Mulholland Farm for 6+ years along with his children, Tracy, twins Matthew and Gunnar, and youngest son Sam. And Rick Nelson would die owning Mulholland, loving the idea of it being Flynn's house. For Nelson, Mulholland was a place to hide his pain, in the quiet and in the dark, for long stretches at a time. This strange topic for a book begins in the South Seas and it ends in Texas. But no matter how far its three fearless owners strayed, they remained anchored to one place that is burned into the memories of everyone who knew them and visited there. And that place is Mulholland Farm. So that's Robert Matzen, one of the authors, his preface that he wrote in August 2008. Now here is the second part of the preface written by the other author, Micheal Mazzone, same time, August 2008. And he writes, "All my life, I have wanted to write about Hollywood history. A house would seem like an unlikely subject. After all, how much can you write about a house, even if it is a celebrity's home in Hollywood? To my knowledge, no one has ever devoted an entire book to a film star's home, although some worthy subjects come to mind. Doug and Mary's Pickfair and Harold Lloyd's Green Acres. For me, it was Errol Flynn's Mulholland Farm. On a June day in 1987, I walked through Mulholland Farm. In the hour or so that I was there, Mulholland revealed few of its secrets to me. Little did I know of the hidden passageways, peepholes, two-way mirrors, and the resident ghosts that virtually all of Mulholland's residents would come to know. For all that, I would have to wait. Although my time there was brief, I took almost 135mm photos of the house and grounds. Less than a year after my visit to Mulholland, author William Donati contacted me and inquired whether I had a photo of Errol's pal, Hollywood stuntman Buster Wiles at Mulholland Farm. Unfortunately, I did not. And Bill, who was working on his excellent book, My Days with Errol Flynn, written in 1988, he told me that he and Buster had recently spent an afternoon at Mulholland and that the house had been gutted to the point that only bare studs with dangling wiring remained where there had once been walls. I was shocked. When I got off the phone with Bill, I revisited my photos, now knowing that what once had been was no more. When I photographed the house in 1987, little had changed since the Flynn days. Now, the house had been permanently altered, and I realized I may have the last record of its unaltered state. Soon after, I was contacted by a friend and fellow Flynn fan, Trudy McVicker, who asked for a couple sets of my Mulholland pictures. She also wondered if it would be too much trouble for me to provide captions as a kind of virtual tour. More than a year had passed since I took the photos, and I wasn't sure about what went where. Eventually, I had to refer to my negative strips to verify the order in which I had taken the photos. I sketched a floor plan of the house to indicate the areas where I had taken each photo. I tried to read as much as I could find about the house. I sent the photos to Trudy, and she put them in a binder and added my captions to make a booklet. To Trudy, I am grateful for making me realize that in some small way, I had helped to record part of Hollywood history. In the fall of 1988, filmmaker and lifelong Flynn fan Jack Marino called to tell me that Mulholland House had been torn down. Shortly thereafter, Jack sent me a photo of the ruins with a lone chimney standing, the very fireplace that I had proudly posed in front of less than a year and a half earlier, and where Errol had posed for Warner Brothers photographer Bert Six some 45 years before that. Errol Flynn's Mulholland House had become a teardown, a house that is purchased not for the home, but for the property upon which it sits. When it comes to real estate in Hollywood, nothing is sacred. Isn't that a good preface, you guys? I love this book, and I know you're going to love it too. So here we go with the introduction by both authors. The first one is by Robert Matzen, and he's dated this March 1987. And he writes, "If the fence had been locked properly, I wouldn't have shimmied through, and there would be no Errol Flynn Slept Here. It was March 19th, 1987, while my then-wife Deborah and I were in Hollywood from Pittsburgh to conduct research for a book about Carole Lombard. Carole Lombard was the wife of Clark Gable, and she died in a plane crash. I believe she was out promoting World War II war bonds when she passed. It was actually very, very tragic. So he says, we had taken a day for sightseeing with Gary Vaughn, a friend and film history buff, and found ourselves winding our way up Mulholland Drive on a sunny, dry, and very warm day. Mulholland is a long roadway that snakes along the crest of the San Fernando Mountains. It bisects some of the richest acreage in the world, where movie stars build their homes because of its status as high-value real estate and its relative seclusion from film studios, fans, and the hubbub of the motion picture business. Right on schedule, according to the tour book guiding us, Flynn's house popped into view as a gleaming stretch of white set into the sagebrush hillside. We followed the instructions in the book and turned off of Mulholland. At the end of a side street stood 2 brick posts painted white and a pair of iron gates. Beyond, in the dry, hot silence, sat a decaying frame house. This dingy, ordinary place had been party central to the stars and the most notorious home in Hollywood. We climbed out of our rental car and stood in the midday heat. Most shocking was the for sale sign. The house was empty, padlocked, and alone, except for us. We gawked for a while and paid our respects to the house. Gary said in his Tennessee drawl, "We aren't going to go in?" "Well, no, we could be arrested for trespassing," I said, and Deborah agreed. But a plan evolved in seconds anyway because of the once-in-a-lifetime nature of the opportunity. We were going to spend a few moments seeing what Errol Flynn's world looked like. I squeezed my way through the slack-jawed gate easily, and Gary followed. And in episode 1, I talk about how Gunnar Nelson said that he thought that the front gates of Mulholland Farm leading up to the house looked like the gates from the Addams Family. By that time, when Rick Nelson and his family moved in, it was kind of getting old. The house was kind of getting old and creepy, and the grounds were creepy. And that I just remember Gunnar saying that when you opened the gates, it even sounded like, like a haunted house kind of thing. Let's see. It said, "From my Wicked, Wicked Ways, Flynn's autobiography, I knew of this house, its history, and its importance to Flynn. It had been his creation, his dream, his glory, and his refuge. We walked around the garage and the west wing, where I could smell dry, rotting wood. I knew then that the place was doomed. Suddenly, we could see it all. The front of the house, the lawn, the pool. The place known as Errol Flynn's Mulholland Farm was a rambling 2-story colonial with dormers. We wandered over to the pool. Gary took my photo on the diving board. We drifted along the house, snapping photos. It looked like any other empty house inside, lots of bare white walls and half-open doors. Gary posed near the back door, and I snapped another photo. There was a wine cellar tucked into the foundation, its door yawning open. I descended the steps, hoping to find a passage that went up and into the house, but there was none. Just empty wooden wine racks and the guts of an old radio. We had paid our respects to Errol Flynn and Hollywood history, and we departed. The next day, when I should have been working on the Lombard book, the visit to Mulholland was still on my mind, and Deborah and I went back, this time without my camera, with nothing but my eyes and my memory, and I wandered around and drank the place in the dead quiet and the dry March heat. I stood with the pool between me and the house and just looked at this fine old piece of Hollywood history. As I paid my homage, I became aware that I wasn't alone. It hit me all at once. Someone was watching me from a second-floor window. It's one of those moments when the hairs go up on your neck. I remarked to myself, Errol Flynn's house is haunted. And then, just as quickly, you're imagining things. Back home in Pennsylvania, I called my friend, Mike Mazzone, he's the other author, an avid film buff. I told him about the 2 visits to the farm and that the place was for sale, and that Deborah had inquired about it and had been told the asking price was $1.1 million. Mike and his bride were already scheduled to go to Hollywood in 3 months, and so he planned to make his own visit to Mulholland Farm, hoping to have an experience similar to mine. He did, and then again he didn't, but that is his story to tell. So that's Robert Matzen writing his part of the introduction, and now this is Micheal Mazzone writing in June 1987 when he goes and visits the farm 3 months after Bob Matzen went. And Micheal writes, on a cold day in southern Ohio in March 1987, my phone rang and Bob told me of his adventures at Errol Flynn's house. Wow, what a story. He also informed me that he had called the real estate agent and learned that the asking price was set at $1.1 million. I was planning a trip to LA in June. What if I contacted the real estate office as a prospective buyer and arranged a tour? Not long before our departure date, Bob called again to tell me that the house had been sold. So much for my plan to tour Mulholland. In mid-June, my wife Terry and I flew to California. On June 19th, we drove to the Flynn house. It sat off a quiet street, Torrenson Place, which dead ends into the hillside at a circle drive, once Errol's driveway. No one was around, and the gates were open. I looked up the driveway and I could see the gables of the house. I asked Terry if she wanted to walk up with me, and she said, "You go up, I'm okay." Terry was 3 months pregnant at the time, so I left her sitting in the car reading a book. Walking up the drive, I saw an old truck and a dumpster near the garage. I'll never forget how dead quiet it was. I walked around the house and I heard muffled voices. Further along, near the pool, sat a cluster of Mexican gardeners eating lunch and talking. "Excuse me," I said, "but I just got in from Ohio and this used to be Errol Flynn's house. Would you care if I walked around and took some pictures?" A half-dozen guys just stared back at me. The one who seemed to be in charge reminded me of the man in the gold hat from the movie The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. "See, Ohio," he said. "That is a long way." I figured he didn't have the slightest idea how far and didn't really care. I told him I always wanted to see Errol Flynn's house. "See, Errol Flynn, big star." Then he said, "Sure, go on in, the door is open." Go on in, the door is open? I couldn't believe it. He sat there by the diving board, just smiling at me. I walked to the door, pushed it open, and gaped inside. The house was empty, and there wasn't a soul around. I hurried around the west wing. Once out of sight, I sprinted down the driveway. There was Terry sitting in the car with her nose buried in a book. "Come on," I said. "The place is wide open. There are Mexican gardeners up there, and they said we could go inside." "Are you nuts?" said my wife. "You don't know those people." No, and I didn't care. They said I could go inside Errol Flynn's house, and that was good enough for me. I grabbed my camera bag, and up the driveway we went. I started taking photos as we walked. I shot everything that looked important: the gates, the exterior of the house, the wine cellar, everything. There was a set of wooden stairs that looked ready to fall apart. We kept walking and found the gardeners still eating their lunch. The living room without furniture was huge. Right off, I saw the formal fireplace. "That's the fireplace where the Decker painting used to hang," I told Terry. I remembered the famous photo of Errol posing next to the painting. I insisted that Terry recreate the moment with me posed in the same spot, and then we hurried on. I photographed each wall, each room, even the bathrooms. I had a regular 50mm lens and a 28mm wide-angle lens that got more width in closed areas. Sometimes I used a flash, and sometimes I relied on the natural light. I shot off a roll and reloaded. We went into the den. There was another fireplace. Afraid that I had posed in front of the wrong one, I had Terry take another shot. Then we went into an even larger room in the east wing, and it had a fireplace, and I made Terry take yet another picture. Set off from the great room in the east wing was a bedroom. I walked in and noticed that it had a mirrored ceiling made of glass panels. Could this be the two-way mirror? I knew that a trick mirror doesn't have silvering on the back side. Sure enough, one of the panels had an unusual cast to it. This was where Flynn would look down at couples making love. Almost 50 years later, the infamous two-way mirror still existed. I took more photos and Terry warned, "You better slow down." But I wasn't listening. We covered the whole downstairs, dining room, kitchen, garage. By the dining room stood a spiral staircase, and up we went. I made a turn into one of the guest bedrooms. It had a small porch that overlooked the garage. Years later, I read that one of Rick Nelson's sons said he'd been awakened by his father starting his Patera late at night as he went for a drive on Mulholland. I'm sure this must have been that son's bedroom, as the garage was directly below. We went into another bedroom. Down the hall, heading toward the master, was a series of clothes closets. I took a shot in the hall and had come to the end of a roll of film. I reached in my bag for another, but I was out. Terry reminded me, "I told you you were taking too many pictures." I said, "Well, we'll just have to get more film and come back." Terry thought we had pressed our luck enough. She said, "Where are you going to go get film around here?" It was mighty desolate indeed, but what other choice was there? I asked the foreman if we could leave and come right back. He said that was fine. Off we went on Mulholland toward Laurel Canyon. Mulholland is a winding road with hairpin turns that overlooks sheer cliffs. I was driving way too fast, and the suspension in the mid-80s Grand Prix was pretty soft. And Terry was prone to morning sickness. She warned me to slow down or else. I flew over Laurel Canyon toward the valley. At Laurel and Ventura, I spotted a pharmacy, bought my film, hung a U on Ventura, careened back onto Laurel, and floored it for Mulholland. I bet Rick Nelson couldn't have made the trip any faster in his Patera than I made that day. In minutes, we were at the house, reloaded, and shooting. Who remembers the days of film, of having to actually buy film, put it in your camera, take it to the freaking store, wait days to have it develop, get it back, and then you got it back in your envelope with your negatives, and that was just crazy. Those were the days, right? Into Errol Flynn's large and formal-looking bedroom we went. There was another fireplace. I had Terry take my picture, just in case. Out the window, I could see the workmen clearing brush on the hillside. Here I was, standing in the most private room at Errol's beloved Mulholland farm. From another window, I could see the pool below. We made our way back downstairs and outside, where I took some pictures around the pool. I walked over to a brick and flagstone stairway beyond a set of gates. Stone lions stood guard. The steps led to the tennis courts below. When we had seen it all, we reluctantly walked back down the driveway. I still couldn't believe what I had just experienced. It was as if Errol had invited me up for the day, but he never showed up, perhaps detained by an alluring blonde. I looked over my shoulder at the place one last time, and we got in the car and drove away. If I had been there a day earlier or a day later, I would not have been afforded the same opportunity. So it was that fate smiled on me one day 20 years ago, helping to make this book possible. So that is the preface and the introduction, and the book has a picture of a 25-year-old Errol Flynn, and it's captioned, "Errol Flynn, age 25, steps off the boat at the port of New York, bad teeth and all, and poses for a Warner Brothers photographer. Ever optimistic, Flynn states on his immigration form that he hopes to spend 6 months in the picture business." That was when he was being called to Hollywood, and his trip was being financed by some of the bigwigs over at Warner Brothers. So I hope that this brief preface and introduction got you guys fired up for the book. I love the setup. I love the way that we kind of stumble upon Errol and his world and the subsequent owners of Mulholland House by coming upon this once really, really nice, but now dilapidated and decaying house. And you can't help but wonder about the mystery and the intrigue. Who were these men that lived in this home? And who was Errol, the man that built the home, the man that just burned out and died at the age of 50, just way too young because of his hard living life and the risks that he took. This book is so good, you guys. I really loved it, and I'm so excited to get into it with you. Look out for chapter 1 coming soon. And in the meantime, if you haven't yet watched episode 1, where I give you the backstory about Errol and the 2 owners that followed him, and where I tell you the ghost story, Tracy Nelson's ghost story. She's the daughter of Rick Nelson, who was the 3rd and last owner of Mulholland House, all of that good stuff. And I look forward to bringing you chapter 1, and that's going to be in episode 3. Until then, God bless. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye.